Tonight, I'm going to take a look at Kate Wilhelm's Where Late the Sweet Bird Sang. This novel won the Hugo in 1977, and it was up against some pretty stiff competition. So that year, it was up against Frank Herbert's Children of June, Robert Silverberg's Shadrach in the Furnace, Joe Alderman's Mind Bridge, and Frederick Pohl's Man Plus. So it was up against some pretty stiff competition. And when I went back to this book after about a 10-year hiatus, I was expected to be reminded of just how good this novel was, because it also won the Locus Award and one other award that doesn't come to mind. So it was highly rated book. So the book is written in 3 parts, and they almost read like 3 separate novellas. So what we find is that Earth is in a decline. We find that crops have been failing, animals are becoming infertile, and things are looking rather bleak. But there's this one wealthy family who is also a bunch of scientists who have started acquiring a whole lot of laboratory equipment, chemicals, in order to sort of circumvent and prolong humanity's life. So that sort of saw the writing on the wall. I said, we've got to do something. We've got to prepare for what is inevitable here. And what they learn is that man is also becoming infertile. So they've set up their laboratories, and I'll go into some of the likes and dislikes later on, but they've set up their laboratories, and they've started to clone both the crops and also some animals. And what they've learned is that, for whatever reason, unbeknownst to them, is that the 4th generation of clones always has some kind of anomaly and basically is not successful, and the animals die. So they're stuck with this problem where they can't get past the 4th generation of clones. In their despair, as they find that they themselves have now become infertile, they do what for them was almost sacrilege, and they've started to clone themselves in order to overcome this problem with the 4th clone generation. So they come to this drastic conclusion that we've got to clone ourselves here, otherwise humanity as we know it is going to become extinct. And they do just that. So what we find is that as the first generations of clones grow, they start to feel very close-knit. It's almost reminiscent of John Wyndham's, what's the name of the book? The one where those creepy kids come around. What's the name of the book? The Midwich Cuckoos. Sorry, the name escaped my mind for some reason. So yeah, those first generation clones honestly remind me of the Midwich Cuckoos and the children there, because they share this sort of telepathic capability where they can sort of sense each other's feelings, and they really feel like they have to be close-knit. So very spooky. I found it spooky, like it was almost verging on the side of terror. And another reason that sort of gave me those feelings is Kate Wilhelm also talks about a flu-like disease that has hit humanity, and she likens it to the Spanish flu. And I guess some of that COVID, post-COVID trauma is still with me, I guess, a bit, because some of it just came too close to home for me to feel comfortable with it. So I thought it was really good. It was like borderline spooky. So the first part really deals with the downfall of humanity and the rise of these clones who are very closely knit. They're almost telepathic. They can sense each other's feelings. So much so that they start to see humans, the elders who are still naturally born humans, as outsiders, almost alien to them, and they sort of distance themselves from them. So much so that by the end of the first part of the book, we find that these clones are pretty much independent and don't really have anything in common with humanity, the way we know it. So the second part of the book deals with the second generations of clones, and what we find is that they've started to run out of resources, some of the chemicals that they use in the cloning process, and they've basically come to the conclusion that, hey, we've got to go down river, go down to the old cities and do some investigation so we can get the equipment that we need, get the chemicals we need to continue our research and continue duplicating, because they're basically now duplicating themselves by cloning themselves so they can, extend humanity's life on Earth. And what we find is that when these clones are separated from the rest of the community, they start to suffer from some pretty major psychological trauma. So much so that they, become very reclusive. They suicidal in many ways. They just can't tolerate being away from the rest of the clan. And so much so that when they return to the village, they're seen as someone that has mental illness that needs to be addressed because it could spread through the rest of the clones and cause all sorts of grief and basically the decline of humanity again. So what we learned is that there are a couple of these clones who have not dealt with separation well and almost started to get a sense of humanity, for the lack of better words, where they sort of sense that, hey, there's something to being alone. There's something to be learned by feeling this way. And it was something that they wanted to sort of embrace. And that was sort of really, frowned upon by the rest of the clones to a point where they were excommunicated. Then we come to the third part of the book where there are these excommunicated clones who got together and naturally conceived a new child. And the third part is really about this new child and his struggles with the rest of the community, because it looks like in the cloning process, man has lost his ability to process information and to learn new things. And it really goes through the story of this human, really, naturally born human, and his struggles with the rest of the clan and trying to reconcile and make a way forward. So I really enjoy post-apocalyptic books. One of the favorites that comes to mind is Earth Abides by George R. Stewart, one of the all-time classics. It was I can't recall if it won a retro Hugo Award. I'll have to check that up, because if it did, we may start including some of the retro awards on our Hugo and Ladder winner book here. Sorry, a bit of a diversion, right? But Earth Abides, great book. But I can't say this was in the same league. It was a post-apocalyptic book, or an apocalyptic book. But, I don't know, for me, it just lacked a couple of things. And I think one of the things is that, like I mentioned, those 3 short stories could have almost have been read as 3 short stories. And there was no real synergy between the 3. And I found myself, as I was warming up to a particular character, that character sort of left the scene, and we never really reconciled with that character or understand what their fate ultimately was. And that happened a couple of times with some of the key characters in the book that had me wishing that, hey, let's go back, let's revisit these people and see what happens. But I can understand why Kate Wilhelm has done that, because I think that was the predicted outcome, what I probably predicted would happen. And she hasn't done that. So I think that's probably one of the reasons. But in this particular example, I thought the novel would have benefited by being predictable, right? But look, it's a mild criticism. The other criticism of the novel I have is the characters themselves. So they're all, and I can understand why it is the way it is, because we're talking about a bunch of clones, so their personalities were very similar, right? And they also shared similar names like Barry and Brad or whatever. They were all B's, right? All C's, all D's, to reflect this sort of non-individuality. But yeah, I understand why it was done, but I also feel like, it didn't really matter who was talking, which of the clones were talking, because they were all of the same cut, and the depth of character was not really there. But again, it's a mild criticism, and I can understand why she's done that, because it really talks to the clones and to the fact that they were not individuals at all, right? So I get it, but I don't know, it sort of frustrated me at times, I guess. So unlike some of the other Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels on the shed ladder behind me here, I read Kate Wilhelm's Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang. It must have only been about 10 years ago. So I was expecting that when I picked the novel up and started reading through it, it would refreshen my memory and that I'd recall exactly what the novel was about and appreciate it for what it is, which is a great Hugo Award winning book. Especially when I had a quick look to refresh my memory and see who she was up against that year, in the likes of Frank Herbert, Silverberg, one of my all-time favourites, Frederick Prohl and Joe Haldeman. I was honestly expecting that, hey, I'm going to be blown away. For whatever reason, you've forgotten this novel and you're going to be blown away. This is going to be one of those all-time classics. But unfortunately, it read like a new book. I couldn't remember any of it at all. So when it comes to the memory test that I've been putting some of these novels to, this one, unfortunately, just went in one ear and out the other, right? I just didn't recall. But I did enjoy it. That's the strange thing. I really did enjoy it. And I've been asking myself this question all week. Did I enjoy it because I was on holidays and I was relaxed when I read this novel? I took a short, weekend away and I had a lot of time to read in a relaxed environment. So I wonder how much of my enjoyment came down to the fact that I was relaxed on holidays, picking up a good book in what was terrible weather, perfect reading weather. So how much of the enjoyment I had of the book was to do with that or the novel itself? But I think I would not be fair to the book. I think it was because it is an enjoyable read. The narrative flows quite nicely. I found myself engaged in the story and I did enjoy it. And I was talking to my kids about it and I was thinking, hey, this is not it's a pretty decent book, a bit spooky. I remember saying to them, it's a bit spooky, this book. It comes close to home in many occasions. And there's elements of there, like I said, of that midwich cuckoos, those sort of hair tingling sensations you get on the back of your head. Who would I recommend this novel to? So I think anyone who likes post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic type novels, it's right in that alley, right? It's a well-written book. My criticisms are really towards the story and the characters, but I think Kate really needed to do what she did. The criticisms I have of the book is also what I feel Kate needed to do to tell the story that she told in this book, right? Because it is a really good book and it's a very worthy Hugo Award winning novel. And yeah, just thinking more and more about it as I'm talking, I think some of the things I didn't like about the book needed to be in the book for her to tell the story that she wanted to tell. Does it make for the best story of all times, best post-apocalyptic story of all times? More, I don't think so, but there may be others out there that absolutely think that way and think about this book. And, just to show that I did enjoy it, because I really don't want to dissuade you from reading this book, because I really did enjoy it. And just to highlight that, there's 3 new Kate Wilhelm's book on my bench that I plan to read over the next couple of weeks, because I've been neglecting Kate Wilhelm for some time and I really did enjoy it. And I thought, you know what, I really do need to read some more of her books because she's a really good writer and she told a really good story that I did really enjoy. And I'm holding the book upside down. So who would I recommend it to? I think maybe if you're a horror guy, and you're interested in a science fiction deviation or dipping your toes into science fiction, I wouldn't call this a bridging novel in that sense, but I think there's some areas in this novel that, may just appeal to some of you horror folks out there, and you may just find it interesting enough to whet your appetite. So look, good book, Kate Wilhelm's Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang. And I think part of the problem I have with this book is the actual title. I remember the title. I love the title of this book. And every time I look at my reference material for Hugo Neville and, Hugo Award-winning books, and I see Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang, I always think this is a great sounding title. But probably better sounding title than that actual novel was. But hey, let's go back to the Sci-Fi Shed ladder here and see where we're going to rank tonight's book. Yeah, let's do it. So back to the Hugo Nebula shed ladder that we've got going here, and yet another difficult decision. Now, just a kindly reminder that these are never easy to rank. They're all great books and all worthy of winning the Nebula or Hugo Award. And Kate Wilhelm's Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang is definitely no exception to that list. Wonderful book. I really did enjoy it. So much so that, like I said, I bought another 3 books that I've got behind me here that I'd like to read over the next couple of months because I did really enjoy her writing style. So where do we rank Where Late the Sweet Bird Sang? Maybe let's start with Ursula's The Left-Handed Darkness as a good midway point to see if we need to move up or down the list. And I don't think that Kate's, Where the Late Sweet Bird Sang is as good as The Left Hand of Darkness. So we won't rank higher than that. Interesting with this Immortal, because in some ways that's a post-apocalyptic book as well. So maybe we should have started with that. And is Where the Late Sweet Bird Sang better than this Immortal, which is also considered a post-apocalyptic novel? But I don't think it is. I really enjoyed this Immortal. I really liked the multifaceted lead character that we had in Conrad in this Immortal. I thought it was a very complex character, and I really did enjoy reading that novel. So I wouldn't rate it above that. Is it better than The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester? That's an interesting one. Is it better than The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester? Maybe let's skip Alfred Bester, come back to Flowers for Algernon. That might help us understand where we need to go. Is it better than Flowers for Algernon? In the past, I've ranked Flowers where it is because, like I mentioned, it's more of a general good fiction novel than it is a science fiction novel. But it's really hard for me to put Where Late the Sweet Bird Sang above Flowers for Algernon, which automatically I think is going to remove The Demolished Man from the equation as well. And there are other reasons I really enjoyed that Demolished Man, because like I said, in that book, some of the themes I think for me are timeless and held up to the test of time. So I think that's okay, and I think we can justify this being Flowers for Algernon being better, because generally speaking, it's just a wonderful novel. I really like Flowers for Algernon. So I find it really hard to put Where Late the Sweet Bird Sang ahead of Flowers for Algernon, which really brings us down to Babel 17. And is Kate's work better than Babel 17? In the past, I've talked to the memory test, right? How well these books have stood the test of time when it comes to my memory recall and observation of these books. And one of the key reasons why Ursula's book is there, and I think that I remember Babel 17 a whole lot more than I do Where the Late Sweet Bird Sang, and that's considering that I read this novel something like 10 years earlier than I did previously, than I did Kate Wilhelm's book. I read Babel 17 about 20 odd years ago, and I read this about 10 years ago, and I couldn't remember any of it, where there were elements of Babel 17 that I did recall quite clearly. So it's going to sit here for now, but I think there is other books on the Hugo Nebula that will challenge that position, but time will tell. But not to take anything away from Where Late the Sweet Bird Sang, I did really enjoy the book, and that's the thing about these Hugo and Nebula books, right? They're all wonderful books. They're all worthy of reading, and they're all worthy of reading more than once, right? I've read all of these books more than once, and I don't regret having read Kate Wilhelm's book for a second time. I enjoyed it. It was a good read, worthy of being a Hugo winner. Like I said, I'm stressing this. That's why I bought a couple more of her books, because I think there's a lot to say about Kate Wilhelm's writing, and I did enjoy it. So yeah, look, thank you. That's been The Shed, the Sci-Fi Shed, and we'll see you next time in The Shed.